Why Leonor's choice could spark scandal? No. The lights inside the palace never truly go dark. They dim. They wait. Stone corridors hold centuries of footsteps, and tonight they carry the measured pace of a young woman whose future is already written, at least on paper. Outside, Madrid breathes quietly. Inside, continuity watches itself being tested. For Princess Leonor, every public appearance is ceremonial, but every private decision is consequential. She was raised not to improvise history, but to inherit it. From the moment her name was spoken in the line of succession, the institution adjusted itself around her existence. Protocols hardened, expectations aligned, silence became a form of preparation. Continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in visible presence. A presence trained to signal stability before it speaks, restraint before it acts. Spain's monarchy does not survive on affection. It survives on predictability, on the quiet reassurance that tomorrow will resemble yesterday closely enough to feel safe. This is the living thread of continuity, spun carefully after decades of fracture, exile, and restoration. Every gesture from the air is measured against that thread. Not because she is fragile, but because the system around her is. 2 minutes into this story, the first misunderstanding must be dismantled. The question is not what choice she may be making. The question is who is allowed to make choices at all when a crown is involved. Power, in constitutional monarchies, is most visible where it is most constrained. What looks like freedom is often choreography. What appears personal is almost always institutional. Behind closed doors, advisors do not ask what feels right. They ask what holds, what endures, what does not provoke tremors in markets, parliaments, or allied capitals. National identity is woven into these rituals, and rituals lose their power the moment they become optional. At 5 minutes, the words surface again, this time heavier. Not as accusation, as risk assessment. A scandal, in this context, is not moral failure. It is narrative loss of control. It is the moment when interpretation escapes the institution's grip and enters the public bloodstream unfiltered. The monarchy has lived through this before. Spain remembers. Europe remembers. And foreign chancelleries remember as well. In Washington, stability is currency. An heir who signals unpredictability unsettles more than tabloids, it complicates diplomacy. In London, where monarchy is both mirror and cautionary tale, every deviation is studied with polite intensity. Ottawa and Canberra read these moments as stress tests for a system they share symbolically, if not constitutionally. Berlin, ever attuned to institutional discipline, measures continuity against credibility. At 8 minutes, something remains deliberately unspoken. Not denied, not confirmed, simply held in reserve. This silence is strategic. Institutions often speak loudest by refusing to clarify. Ambiguity buys time. Time allows recalibration. But time also invites speculation, and speculation erodes authority when left unmanaged. By the midpoint, the strain becomes perceptible. Not dramatic, structural, the kind engineers fear more than explosions. The kind that develops when assumptions no longer align with reality. The heir is coming of age in a Spain that is not the Spain her predecessors were trained to reassure. Social expectations have shifted. Media velocity has accelerated. Privacy has thinned to transparency. Yet the institution has not forgotten its purpose. Duty outweighs desire. Always has. Survival of the institution is the ultimate prize, not individual fulfillment. This is not cruelty. It is design. 14 minutes in, the point of no return approaches. Quietly. Once an expectation is publicly visible, it cannot be unseen. Once a possibility is acknowledged, it cannot be erased. The monarchy can absorb many things: criticism, satire, even dissent. What it struggles to absorb is precedent. Because precedent invites repetition. At 19 minutes, the future casts a longer shadow. Not a threat announced, but one implied. Constitutional balance is delicate. Political actors watch for leverage. Cultural commentators search for symbols. Allies recalibrate tone. The crown remains outwardly calm, but calm is not the absence of pressure. It is pressure managed. In the final moments, the phrase returns for the last time, no longer speculative but unresolved. Not as a headline, as a question. Whether this choice becomes a fracture or a footnote will depend not on emotion, but on alignment, between tradition and modernity, between personal conviction and institutional necessity. The monarchy stands where it always has, at the edge of history, aware that what comes next has not yet been decided. The cameras never capture the moments that matter most. They wait outside rooms where decisions are weighed not by impulse, but by consequence. Inside those rooms, the monarchy speaks to itself in the language of risk. For Princess Leonor, preparation has never been optional. It has been immersive. From military academies to constitutional briefings, her formation is not about power exercised, but power contained. The crown she is destined to inherit does not command Spain. It reassures it, and reassurance depends on restraint. This is the quiet paradox at the heart of modern monarchy. The heir must appear human enough to belong to the nation, yet distant enough to stand above it. Too remote, and relevance erodes. Too familiar, and authority dissolves. Continuity lives in that narrow corridor between presence and separation. What unsettles institutions is not change itself, but unsignaled change. The monarchy can adapt, slowly, deliberately, on its own terms. What it cannot tolerate is acceleration imposed from outside. A single personal choice, when perceived as spontaneous rather than ceremonial, threatens that rhythm. And rhythm, in governance, is stability. At this stage, the tension is no longer theoretical. Advisors recognize the pattern. History offers precedents, and none of them are comforting. Across Europe, moments when heirs appeared to choose freely were often moments when institutions were forced to explain themselves. Explanation weakens mystique. Mystique is not vanity, it is insulation. By now, international observers have adjusted their gaze. In the United States, analysts frame the situation through democratic optics, questioning symbolism rather than legality. In the United Kingdom, the response is more introspective, shaped by lived experience. Canada and Australia view it as a test of constitutional symbolism under generational pressure. Germany, characteristically, focuses on procedure, asking whether form will prevail over sentiment. This is the living thread of continuity, stretched but not yet frayed. What remains unresolved is intention. Not what may happen, but how it will be framed when it does. Framing is power. Control the narrative, and the institution survives intact. Lose it, and even minor deviations become magnified into meaning. The silence continues. Not empty silence. Strategic silence. The kind that signals deliberation rather than hesitation. Because within these walls, haste is interpreted as weakness. And weakness, once perceived, is never confined to a single figure. It spreads. Time inside an institution moves differently. Not by headlines, by thresholds. For Princess Leonor, the threshold now in view is not ceremonial. It is constitutional in tone, even if unwritten in law. The Spanish crown exists because it learned, painfully, when to bend and when not to. That memory is embedded in every briefing, every rehearsal, every carefully neutral expression. What is often misunderstood is where authority truly resides. Not in the person, in the pattern. The monarchy's legitimacy depends on its ability to look inevitable. As soon as inevitability is questioned, debate enters the frame. And debate, once normalized around a crown, is corrosive. At this stage, internal conversations shift. Not about permission, but about sequencing. If change must come, it must arrive wrapped in tradition, escorted by precedent, softened by ritual. Sudden clarity is dangerous. Gradual normalization is survivable. This is how institutions metabolize pressure without breaking. Continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in visible presence. Each appearance, each absence, is weighed for signal. Silence can reassure. It can also unsettle. The difference lies in timing. And timing is the monarchy's oldest instrument of control. Internationally, perception continues to harden into expectation. In Washington, analysts begin to separate symbolism from stability, watching for reassurance that alliances are untouched. In London, there is a quieter recognition. This is the familiar tension between modern life and inherited role. Ottawa and Canberra read the moment as generational, wondering how long symbolism alone can anchor loyalty. Berlin, reserved but attentive, notes whether procedure still leads emotion. At this point, the risk is no longer scandal. It is reinterpretation. Once observers believe they understand what a choice means, reclaiming that meaning becomes nearly impossible. Institutions survive not by explaining themselves, but by remaining legible without explanation. Behind the scenes, contingency replaces optimism. Not panic. Preparedness. Because power that lasts is power that assumes strain is normal. Duty outweighs desire not because desire is wrong, but because desire is unpredictable. The path forward remains open, but narrower. Every option still exists, yet each carries weight. And the heaviest burden is this: whatever happens will not be judged once. It will be referenced, replayed, reused as a benchmark for what comes after. This is how history quietly sharpens its tools, long before it ever makes contact. Pressure does not announce itself in palaces. It accumulates. For Princess Leonor, the accumulation is subtle but relentless. Each public silence invites interpretation. Each routine engagement is scanned for deviation. The institution understands this pattern well. Attention, once concentrated, never fully disperses. It lingers, waiting for confirmation. What matters now is not the act, but the framing that precedes it. Institutions rarely collapse from a single decision. They weaken when the logic behind their decisions becomes inconsistent. Continuity survives when actions appear inevitable in hindsight. It falters when they look improvised. Inside the system, legal texts offer only partial shelter. Constitutions define powers, not perceptions. Perception is shaped by ritual, repetition, and restraint. This is why the crown invests so heavily in ceremony. Ceremony slows time. It converts uncertainty into familiarity. It reassures the nation that nothing essential has shifted, even when adaptation is underway. But adaptation has limits. Move too slowly, and relevance erodes. Move too quickly, and authority fractures. The heir stands precisely at that intersection. Not as an individual testing boundaries, but as a symbol through which the boundaries themselves are tested. Abroad, the readings grow sharper. In the United States, the narrative begins to touch culture as much as politics. Probing whether traditional institutions can coexist with modern expectations. In the United Kingdom, the tone is restrained but knowing, an awareness born of experience rather than curiosity. Canada and Australia observe with a measured distance, attentive to how symbolism absorbs generational change. Germany watches for consistency, for signs that process still governs outcome. This is the living thread of continuity, pulled taut across borders as well as centuries. Internally, contingency planning matures. Not to constrain choice, but to absorb it. Every possible outcome is mapped for institutional impact, not personal consequence. The monarchy does not ask whether a decision feels justified. It asks whether it can be integrated without inviting precedent that cannot later be controlled. What remains most fragile is expectation. Once the public believes a transformation is imminent, restraint begins to look like resistance. And resistance, even when principled, invites pressure. The institution senses this shift. It responds not with statements, but with posture. Stillness becomes deliberate. Neutrality becomes expressive. Because in moments like this, survival depends on one thing above all else, ensuring that when history finally moves, it does so at the institution's pace, not the crowd's. Expectation, once awakened, becomes difficult to discipline. It presses forward, searching for signs. For Princess Leonor, the institution now faces a familiar dilemma disguised as a modern one. The crown must neither rush to reassure nor retreat into opacity. Either extreme invites misreading. What endures is balance, carefully calibrated, visibly calm, internally alert. At this stage, the monarchy's strength is not in declaration, but in alignment. Appearances are synchronized. Language remains exact. Absence and presence are both purposeful. Nothing is accidental, because accident suggests loss of control. And control, in constitutional monarchy, is credibility. This is where the deeper institutional instinct asserts itself. Not to suppress change, but to domesticate it. Change, when absorbed slowly, becomes continuity by another name. But when it arrives unfiltered, it threatens to redefine the rules by which legitimacy is judged. Continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in visible presence. The heir's composure signals more than personal discipline, it reassures the system itself. The monarchy does not project certainty because it possesses it. It projects certainty because uncertainty, left visible, multiplies. Beyond Spain, interpretation settles into narrative. In the United States, commentators begin to frame the moment as emblematic, less about monarchy, more about generational transition. In the United Kingdom, the reading is quieter, almost cautionary, shaped by the knowledge that symbolism can age faster than institutions expect. Canada and Australia consider longevity, asking whether inherited authority can still feel contemporary. Germany watches for procedural integrity, attentive to whether form still governs outcome. This is the living thread of continuity, now tested not by opposition, but by attention. Internally, the calculus sharpens. Advisors no longer debate possibility, they debate sequencing. Not whether the institution can endure adaptation, but how to ensure adaptation reinforces rather than replaces its logic. Precedent remains the silent arbiter. What happens once will be remembered as permission. The risk, now, is subtle but acute. If restraint is mistaken for indecision, confidence begins to thin. If decisiveness appears unanchored, authority wavers. The path forward exists, but it narrows with every passing day. And so the institution waits, not passively, but precisely. Because in moments like this, the greatest test is not the choice itself, but whether the crown can make that choice appear inevitable, measured, and unmistakably its own. History rarely ends with resolution. It pauses. For Princess Leonor, the pause is now the message. Not defiance. Not retreat. A deliberate stillness that allows the institution to remain intact while the future edges closer. This is how continuity protects itself, not by force, but by refusing to be rushed. The crown has survived louder crises than this. Exile, transition, reinvention under scrutiny. It endures because it understands a truth modern politics often forgets: legitimacy is sustained not by explanation but by coherence. Every action must fit the long pattern, or the pattern dissolves. Across capitals, the conclusion remains unwritten. Washington watches for assurance that symbols remain stable. London recognizes the weight of inheritance pressing against time. Ottawa and Canberra read the silence as discipline, not absence. Berlin notes that procedure still holds, and that restraint has not yet failed. This is the living thread of continuity, stretched forward into uncertainty. What happens next will not announce itself as rupture. If it comes, it will arrive quietly, framed as evolution rather than exception. Or it may not come at all, absorbed, redirected, rendered invisible by the institution's oldest skill, patience. Duty still outweighs desire. Structure still outlasts impulse. And yet, history waits. Not impatiently, attentively, because whatever follows this moment will not belong only to one young woman, or even to one generation. It will belong to the record, referenced, studied, and measured against everything that came before. The lights inside the palace remain on. Not because a decision has been made, but because the story is not finished.